Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and I've got the very cozy Nightmare Vision on today. Nightmare, how are you doing?
I'm extremely cozy right now. It couldn't
You
be cozier.
can't be cozy. I've been told, like, some people cannot be cozy. I don't get this. Like, shouldn't you want the whole world to be cozy? I'm very cozy right now, and it sounds like you are. So I don't think they own coziness, to be honest.
It's really hard to be highly respected and cozy.
We've got a lot to talk about today, believe it or not. First up, the Democratic primary is finally over. Are you sad? Are you sad, Nightmare? I mean, there was a lot of great content over the few months that it was lasting, but now it's over. See, now Joe Biden is your nominee. Bernie Sanders conceded last week. He dropped out, and then he had a pathetic hostage-style video endorsing Biden, rather, with Biden sitting there, having to use a teleprompter to remember who he's talking to. Lots of confidence being inspired right now. The Bernie bros are wailing and gnashing their teeth over their messiah, surrendering to the great fascist Uncle Joe. Bernie's press secretary, the Democratic Socialists of America, and many others are vowing to never vote for Biden. A never Biden movement is emerging. Chapo Trap House is on suicide watch. So, Nightmare, how did Bernie lose? All these supporters were predicting a Sanders triumph just a few weeks ago. What happened?
Well, I mean, electorally, I think it boils down to the voters. I mean, I think that everyone, I don't know how you underestimate this. Like, this was, maybe you can tell me, was this even a part of the conversation that the Democrat electorate still seems to be like relatively older and whiter?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And then the primary suggested?
Yeah, right? and Bernie was a testament to that. I mean, in 2016, I mean, most of his voters were downscale whites who were not down with Hillary Clinton and the like woke liberalism that she was espousing. They wanted somebody who would support their interests, focus on economic issues and not tell them all about trans rights and how we need open borders and everything like that. And now this time he listened to his activist base because, I mean, his core supporters were very different from the average person who was voting for Bernie last time. I mean, his core supporters were, college educated people who are not doing very well in this economy, who have like massive amounts of debt, and they believe everything, they are just as woke as they were mocking Hillary Clinton the last time. Even more so, they're much more insistent on trans rights, mass immigration, hating white people and everything like that. And Bernie listened to them, and he was using these people as his surrogates this time. And I think that did have an effect. I mean, there's like several effects to it, but, he couldn't really, Joe Biden had much more appeal to people who were voting Bernie last time, and they liked Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Biden has a certain blue collar appeal that Hillary certainly didn't have, and Bernie lacks.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about the primary, it's easy to have this very online take where Biden is, I mean, it's true. I agree with this to an extent that like Joe Biden is this symbol of how like decrepit and decadent and corrupt the DNC is, and just the general like electoral politics machine is in America. Like, it's kind of bipartisan. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but like in a way, there's a sense in which that's really not true. And like people just don't want to face that Biden is a reasonable choice if you understand that the Democrat primary was insane. Like, the point of a primary, right, is to produce a candidate, to filter out a candidate who can be competitive, right, on a national stage. Like, that's literally the point of the primary. And so from that perspective, the Democrat primary was this time around, and probably it could continue to be so if things don't change. It's a massive failure because the Democrat primary, so in other words, Joe Biden didn't win the Democrat primary. He survived it, and
exactly.
That's what you needed to do. Everyone else was trying to win it. But by winning the Democrat primary, like on its own terms, according to its own rules, you ended up sounding totally unappealing. And that's pretty much what happened to all these people. Like, I remember even in the early stages, like you had like de Blasio dropping out and like right away, and at the same time, he was the one who was having like the most like ideologically committed leftist politics on the stage. And he was also trying to, like, I remember he was like unsuccessfully trying to bully everybody else into sounding like him, as if he were this kind of like pure, what, like a protest candidate with integrity.
Well,
and
he
that's
was like
pretty much
built
the story.
up as like on a paper candidate. It's like, we're going to take like Bernie's economic agenda, and we're going to give it like the mayor of the biggest city. And we're going to have him like a rough and ready, populist. Like, I'm going to talk to the billionaires and tell them what's up. And he also had all the racial justice and social justice issues lined up as well, which Bernie sounds a lot less convincing on. Like when Bernie's talking about it, it's like, oh, systematic racism is a problem. Like he sounds so uncomfortable. It's like transgender. When he talks about these issues, he sounds totally unconvincing. But somebody like de Blasio sounded way more convincing with this. I mean, he's been talking about these issues for years, and it sounded natural. But like people didn't buy it because everyone in New York City seems to hate de Blasio, even though he's like a 2-term mayor. It's hilarious that like Mike Bloomberg, who is the complete opposite of what people think would be a viable candidate, was far more viable than de Blasio. And if Bloomberg hadn't been on the debate stage, if he had just like not done the debates, the primary could have been very different. I mean, Bernie might be winning right now because the field stayed divided between Biden and Bloomberg, the establishment field, and older black voters are split between them. And then Bernie's exploiting that split.
Even bringing up Bloomberg is a great point to buttress this, because even Bloomberg is less like insane when you look at it in that perspective. Like the way people were looking at Bloomberg, again, just like with Biden, there's a truth to the way everyone was looking at Bloomberg. Like, oh my God, this corrupt oligarch is just trying to buy the election with his 60-something billion or however much he has. And it's like, well, yeah, but also think about it from Bloomberg's perspective. Like, while Julian Castro is arguing over whether like trans black prostitutes should have reproductive rights, he gets to just sit there and wait for something potentially to happen to Biden, right? Like, so in other words, if something happened to Biden, if Biden dropped out, if he had health problems or something like that, it really wasn't the most unreasonable projection for Bloomberg to just think, I can just skip all these guys, because he could have.
And he almost did. I think it was just in unique circumstances that, I mean, the debates were killing him. He looked like, he looked terrible in them. He was not a compelling figure. He was just getting raked over the coals. He had terrible explanations about, he alienated, I think, the white women demographic when he was like talking about his NDAs. And they're like, well, they agreed to him. It's okay. They said, I said, sexually harassed them, but, they have NDAs. So it's not a problem. And also all his racial comments and everything like that, the media was able to take him down to a notch that convinced them that he needed to drop out. Which is effective, but he almost did succeed in a way that people who, on paper and to the media were much more serious candidates like Kamala, Warren, Buttigieg. Like Buttigieg had no chance in hell to ever win a general election. I mean, this is some creepy, McKinsey lab experiment who's gay, who has like this really strange relationship with his husband. He has like very much sociopath vibes. Everything about him is like bizarre, and he's like not appealing to minority voters at all. And yet the media was like, oh, this is a very serious candidate. I think we can win with him. And it's the same with Kamala was spending all her time, there's like news articles saying this, that her campaign was way too focused on Twitter and what Twitter people cared about rather than actual voters. And she was also out front with social justice issues. Like she spent like 2 weeks talking about how Trump needs to be banned from Twitter, which like the average person doesn't care about at all. Like, it's like, why the hell are you spending so much time talking about how the president needs to be banned? And she had like this really outrageous, press release she sent to Twitter demanding how he's like a threat to our democracy and thus you need to silence him. But these are the type of stunts that got her attention from journalists, but they didn't connect with anybody. I mean, she wasn't talking about things that actual people cared about.
Yeah, favorable coverage in this primary was almost inversely related to actual popularity and electability. Like,
it's true. Bernie and Biden were probably the most hated by journalists, and Bloomberg, and Bloomberg especially, were the most hated by journalists. Yet they were the only three that ever had a chance of winning.
Yeah, like Kamala Harris is another example of the primary being kind of poisonous. Like, everyone knows right off the bat, like, oh, this is a DA from like San Francisco, wherever she's from, and like,
yeah, San Francisco.
She's a prosecutor, right? She's running for president, and then like the entire primary is like designed to have someone like that not win. And so it's like there's a contradiction at the heart of her whole like candidacy, her whole attempt. It's like, you're a DA, so then you have all the takes on Twitter about how like Kamala Harris is a cop, and it's like she's basically having to apologize for her career, like not to defend her.
But it's the same. Like, everyone had to do that. I mean, Biden apologized for his career. Bloomberg apologized for his career. I mean, they did it less convincingly. I mean, and even in any way, like Kamala being a cop is what a lot of these, awfuls, fluent white female liberals, which we'll talk a little bit more about them later, they want like this guy, they want this like strong female cop who's going to arrest like Trump and like put him in jail for treason. And they want like somebody who's going to punish all their enemies and send them to jail and everything like that. And she still had that authoritarian streak in her, but she knew that like the Bernie people were making fun of her so much about it that she was hesitant to fully embrace it. Yeah, and there's something to be said that maybe if she had embraced it, she would have been a more serious candidate.
She probably would have. And then I'm not saying Tulsi caused her demise, but when Tulsi deliberately brought up, like, it's like, hey, you're a DA. Like, basically, that was Tulsi's criticism. Like, hey, you were a prosecutor. She just mysteriously vanished after that. Like, that's literally all it took.
And she just kept focusing on, internet issues and it's the same with Beto O'Rourke. He never got up, ever at all. I mean, Buttigieg kind of stole his base in the primary, and he never really recovered from that. And he was also the most like extreme, like social progressives, like, hell yeah, we're going to take your guns, printing those shirts and everything like that. It was like Beto decided that he wanted to be the a nightmare vision, so to speak, of what conservatives think liberals are, and he decided to embrace that, and nobody really wanted that. And back to Biden and Bernie, is with Bernie, he really did get screwed over by the process. That he really thought that if the field stays divided, everyone thought the field was going to stay divided for pretty much the entirety of March. Ignore like coronavirus, upsetting the primary, is that he pretty much lost. He was done on Super Tuesday when all of those voters were going to Biden. Like, his campaign was over. He should have just dropped out then and there, because there was like clearly no path to, the nominations. That the Democratic establishment has enough institutional authority to convince everyone to drop out and back senile old Joe Biden, who, in contrast to all these other candidates we have, Joe Biden has not made a convincing case to any of the, internet issues. Like, I could never imagine Biden giving a convincing lecture about transgender rights, or about like saying Latinx or anything like that.
I mean, I'd love to see him try, now that you're saying this. I would really love it.
He might. I don't know if he has the brain capacity to actually comprehend these. I mean, he would just like say like Latin X voters who, and then he would just like say something about transgender is like people who would be like, those people who like cut their dicks off or something.
We'll use the phrase "lady boy."
Yeah. he would just like, he can't help himself but be accidentally like racist and sexist and like, unwoke. And it's like, it's a lovable aspect about him. I mean, it's not necessarily somebody you want to put up in a presidential election. And, the Bernie people can't believe that they lost to somebody who's so out of tune with, socialism. This is somebody who is like, yeah, you're not going to have Medicare for all, who's like deliberately saying, no, I don't want a revolution, who is fine with being, friendly with billionaires. I mean, like, I don't think Biden has said one negative thing about billionaires at all, or the power structures. I mean, the only thing Biden is offering is, a rewind button to 2014. To we're rewinding to the Obama era.
Part of it.
And
well,
a lot of
I
people,
think that
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think that a lot of it has to do with the fear mongering of the campaign. Like, I think that in a lot of ways, like, not only was Bernie did become like he did since 2016. Like he became like a kind of cheap imitation of that type of woke politics that was infecting the rest of the primary. But just like, generally speaking, Bernie was never the most convincing when it came to like, I'm doing this because of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is this existential threat to our politics. Like, Bernie was supposed to be somebody who had an independent momentum based on his own like substantial reasons for running. Like, I want Medicare for all, I want free college, et cetera, et cetera. And again, just like the primary was toxic with respect to like being totally obsessed with like this intersectional identity politics that didn't sell at all. It was also obsessed with like Drumpf. It was all Drumpf. Like, we have to stop Drumpf.
And Bernie was, as you said, was the least convincing person about that. And I mean, Biden is not. I mean, he has threatened to take him behind like a building and beat him up and stuff. But even he is more convincing about that. And every other candidate, managed to be far more anti-Trump than Bernie. And Bernie was also like, as I was saying previously, he's totally unconvincing when he has to, repeat the left's dictates about Trump. Like, he's a racist, he's a white supremacist. And even when he was also the only person who would support Trump's tariffs and his economic protectionism. And he had to like be like, well, I support that, but in a different, nicer way that's more appealing to liberals. And all the liberals just want somebody who is firmly opposed to everything Trump's doing, even like things that they may have agreed with like a few years ago, like trade protectionism. They want somebody who's going to be like, this is a disaster to our economy, or somebody who would even want to defund the World Health Organization, which now liberals are going into full self-defense mode, that like, we have to protect the poor bureaucrats, the poor globalist bureaucrats running this stupid organization that just carries water for China. No, we have to keep them funded. I mean, the World Health Organization clearly failed in coronavirus, and they don't deserve our money. Yet we have to pretend that we want these international organizations that are not beholden to the people. They're just run by corrupt bureaucrats. And somebody like Bernie would, he would not appear convincing at all to support these type of organizations. But the average Democratic voter wants their candidate to be just a knee-jerk reaction to whatever Trump's doing. And also bring back the Obama days. I mean, they don't want a revolution. They just want to rewind to the Obama year. And Bernie himself and most of these candidates were running as a rejection of Obama, the Obama years. I mean, Bernie, was condemned Obama. So did many other candidates who said that Obama didn't go far enough. I mean, so did Elizabeth Warren and others. And Biden was the one candidate to, drape himself in Obama, along with Bloomberg, who Bloomberg didn't get along with Obama when he was mayor. And, they hate each other, but they both try to drape themselves in Obama. And Biden, of course, had the most compelling case by being his former VP. And that's older black voters, don't care about any of these social issues. They just care about who their preacher tells them to vote for and who's most associated with Obama.
Yeah. And well, that's the thing, right? So Biden, without being the most convincing of like a Drumpf candidate, like, we need to stop Donald Trump, he embodied the kind of anti-Trump momentum or like impulse, to the extent that he literally embodied the past. Like, in other words, like a return to normalcy. So he didn't have to be this like, if you look at the people, like look at someone like Elizabeth Warren, like I haven't really seen anyone really discuss this, but like, she, in a way, she wasn't the only one, but yeah, she went all in on the hardcore like identity politics and the hardcore I am the anti-Trump. And she came in like third in her own state. Like, she just totally failed.
She's also completely inauthentic. I mean, I mean, the snake meme probably did doom her. I mean, when the Bernie Bros came up with it, I mean, it's so true. I mean, and it's obvious that she's always lied about her life. I mean, from, saying she was a Native American when she's clearly not, Even saying her grandparents were racist because like her blonde hair, blue eyed parents like like got married. Like, oh no, this person's clearly not white. I'm a stereotypical racist from a movie that never existed. The fact that she would attack her own grandparents for fake racism that they never engaged in, just for political points,
it was pretty
shows
disgusting.
how inauthentic and a snake of this person. And I think when she accused Bernie of saying that a woman can never be president, pretty much everyone except for the most hardcore awfuls who hate Bernie didn't believe it. They knew that this was a lie, and they didn't want. And they're like, Bernie would never say something like that. He's too weak. He would never even think of saying something like that. And yet she ran with it in the hope that it would help her win, and it just reaffirmed her snake image.
I hope, I agree with you, but I also, on the other hand, like, I hope he did say it, because boy, was he right. There was
I don't think he would ever say that. I mean, Bernie is just too weak to ever do anything.
Well, I guess it depends. It depends how he meant it. Like, did he mean it in like a practical sense, or in like an aspirational sense? Like, a woman can't win in the sense that like it shouldn't happen, or a woman can't win, in other words, like electorally, it's like just not a viable.
I think he probably just said that she can't win, and maybe he was right. I don't. But then she took that to mean woman. I mean, people.
There were six. There were 6 women running for president on the Democrat side this time. That's like a lot, and they totally dominated the primaries, the conversation, and none of them. Like, Warren was the most impressive, and she was really not impressive. So it was a real rejection of.
And Klobuchar, I find, is even more annoying. I mean, Klobuchar is, as we'll talk about later, is definitely a Karen, even though I oppose the term of Karen, which we'll find out why later. She's definitely the embodiment of Karen. She's like not cool at all. She's like a horrible boss. She's not particularly very smart. I mean, she didn't even know like who the head of state was in Mexico, even though she's on these foreign policy or these committees that deal with foreign policy and everything like that. And people just gravitated towards her just because she was like a moderate choice. And she was also somebody who seemed like a rewind to the Obama years. Moving back to Bernie, where do you think this DSA movement's going to go now? Like, where is this populist left that we've been hearing about so much that's saying that this is their moment? Similar to 2014 when we were hearing about a libertarian movement, or moment rather. Do you think this is like, the Ron Paul movement of, that people think this is going to take power? People thought that would take power in the Republican Party as they were taking over these, local parties and moving up the institutions. Do you think it'll be something like that, or do you think it'll actually still remain as a powerful force within the Democratic Party?
I mean, Bernie's movement is much more substantial and serious than Ron Paul's was. I have to admit that. I was there for Ron Paul's moment and the libertarian moment, and I did kind of tacitly support it. I think it was more good than bad, definitely. So I was like I was a fan of it, but I think it was still mostly online, and it was built off the kind of budding late 2000s like internet culture that was starting.
Yeah,
I think Ron Paul benefited tremendously from that. Bernie, of course, does benefit tremendously from the internet, but I think he also, like, it wasn't powerful enough to win. But Bernie is he has a much more real political presence at the national level than Ron Paul. But with that said, like, I do think it's over as this particular moment. Like, I don't think the Patreon, the Chapo Patreon, is going to dry up tomorrow. But like,
they have a lack of purpose now. I mean, they have to. First off, they matter a whole lot more than they did in 2016. So they have like angry libs who want to portray them as closet Trump supporters and closet racists. And they're very sensitive about that. I mean, in 2016, I could have seen them, if they're so mad, just saying we're going to vote for Trump, because they were definitely more anti-woke back then than they are now. But they now have to listen. I mean, like Bernie, they listen to their audience. They're very concerned about what DSA transgender people say about them, and they're much more into these social issues that, a few years ago they would have laughed about. So I don't know where they're really going to go. They're in a box right now, and they're not really offering like an alternative to what the Democratic Party is giving them. I mean, they don't have a serious alternative. There's not a figure that they can rally around. I don't think there's going to be the Green Party is going to have a third party candidate to put up. And if they do put that person up, a lot of their fans are going to get mad, because I think it's like normie libs, a lot more normie libs are listening to them, who are fine with voting for Joe Biden, because they feel that hating Trump or getting rid of Trump is much more important than enacting socialism. But they themselves think it's enacting socialism, and their own principles are far more important than with Trump. I think to them, they think that Trump and Biden are no different. But to a lot of their audience, there's a clear difference.
I agree with that. And I think that, just getting back to the Ron Paul comparison, I think that there is a similarity in the sense that the libertarian moment turned out to be interesting in seeing what happened to the different fault lines once they kind of gave way. And I think that might be the most interesting outcome of what happens to Bernie and his quote unquote movement, not necessarily where it goes next as a movement, but where its pieces go in like a kind of realignment. Like we saw with Ron Paul, a lot of the even though a lot of it put on the face of this doctrinaire committed libertarianism, I mean, you and I know this, that a lot of those people ended up being diehard Trump supporters who, Trump is not a libertarian.
Well, the grassroots one, I would say there's some similarities and differences between the Bernie movement and the Paul movement. One similarity is that the Sanders people are taking over a lot of left-wing media, which the libertarians were taking over conservative media. I mean, most of the conservative Inc., when I came up to DC in 2013, they were becoming, waiting for Rand Paul, are big Ted Cruz fans. A lot of them were saying that they were libertarians. They probably disagreed with the Pauls on foreign policy, but they were all otherwise very supportive of Rand Paul and people who were emulating Rand Paul, such as Ted Cruz and Mike Lee. I mean, there was still a lot of institutional opposition from neocons, but they similar to how Center for American Progress is vehemently opposed to Bernie, but they were still having this. They were taking over local parties and everything like that. So they did even have statewide institutional power. The thing is, their message didn't appeal to anyone in the Republican electorate. The message that Rand Paul settled on for running in 2016 was trying to appeal to blacks and minorities with like, oh, we're going to get rid of hair braiding regulations. Oh, I'm a Detroit Republican, and we're going to
remember that shirt. Oh my God.
Yeah. There's all these cringe moments, and he stopped talking about immigration. He stopped talking about the issues that made Ron Paul a hit in 2008, with challenging the establishment. He was just trying to look like, oh, I'm a cool Republican. I'm a Republican that liberals can like. And libertarians thought this was going to be the winning message, that it's somebody that Stephen Colbert can be like, oh, he's got some points. That's interesting. They thought that was the way to win, which that was clearly not the way to win. I think Bernie still was connecting with a lot of voters out there, with a lot of that base. The problem is there's not enough of them to take over the voters who are opposed to him. And Bernie did far better than Rand Paul. I mean, Rand Paul, I think, got 4% in Iowa, while Bernie nearly won, had a chance at winning in 2020, and he did in 2016. So there is much more popular support for a left-wing populism and what Bernie Sanders was selling than what the Pauls were selling at any point in time. Even though they had a similar.
In that commercial, what did he chainsaw? Was it the tax code? I forgot.
Yeah, it was the tax code. It was like he's like playing some like rock music. He's like, I'm a different kind of Republican, and it's like nobody was like, this is. I knew all these people who were advising his campaign who thought this was cool. They thought that he could win by sharing office gifts and stuff like that, or GIFs. Is it GIFs, or are we supposed to say GIFs or GIFs? I think it's GIFs, actually. But anyway, they thought that somebody, if they're like, oh, he's for sharing a funny Michael Scott meme about the debt, this is going to win all the young people over. And they really did believe this. And Bernie Sanders has a message that is appealing to a lot of people. It's just not it was not enough to get more than 50% of the Democratic voters. I mean, Democrat voters just want Obama back. They don't want a revolution. And, and Biden's made this message very clear in the last debate. He was like, people don't want a revolution. They just want Obama back. And he was clearly right. And Bernie didn't get that. And, the polls had a similarly committed cadres who were infiltrating, institutional politics.
Yes.
And, they were sending people to Congress who had this message, but it wasn't what voters wanted. They wanted Trump. They didn't want, what Rand Paul, they didn't want libertarianism. So, and that's the difference. With Bernie and, his brand of politics, and there are people who are very popular, who are very powerful, who have the same message, but who are different. I think AOC, I think she will still be a serious player, even though part of her popularity is due to her being attractive. So I don't know if she starts hitting the wall in her mid-30s, maybe people will be less interested in what she has to say. I mean, we can't deny that her her sex appeal is a large reason of why she's so popular right now. But there's several others. Ayanna Pressley could be a major player. There's a lot of these candidates who are probably going to be running in 2020 and winning seats, who are going to be emulating Bernie's message and have, better qualifications, whether they're, a minority, they're non-white, or they're a woman or something like that, that they can overcome and appeal to the necessary percentage of the Democratic base to win. And I don't think there was ever somebody like that who could have articulated a libertarian message. I think if you have somebody who basically says what Bernie said in 2020, that person could win in 2024 or 2028. And I think it will carry on. I could be wrong though, but we'll see how the Biden election goes. I don't know what clear message he's going to run on, besides like, remember
I'm
Obama
still alive,
and having his wife being like, reminding him, it's like, hey honey, why don't you talk about this policy? What policy? I don't remember this. It was like, I knew somebody named Policy back in 1956, and just going on about that. But whoever Biden picks for vice president is going to set the tone. And one of the people he's considering for the role of vice president is Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Yes, her name is Gretchen. She's being touted as a possible running mate for Biden. But at the same time, conservatives are hating her. They're now boomer conservatives are comparing her to Adolf Hitler. Believe it or not, conservatives yesterday launched a drive-by protest against her, demanding she open the state up for business. Many of them carried signs saying "Heil Whitmer" and pictures of her with a toothbrush mustache, rather. There was a lot going on there at the protest, to say the least. What do you make of this protest, Nightmare?
I mean, it's just pure Americana. I've been waiting for this since 2010, 2012. Like a nice return of the Midwestern Republican protest.
Boomer conservatives are back. The Tea Party is back, man.
We're back.
I think we're back. Like, that's like the Tea Party. They're them coming out with like the Heil Whitmer signs and like complaining about Nazi liberals. This is like I think I'm back. Like the Tea Party is back.
I mean, in one sense, I was watching some of the footage, and the people are like, some of them, they're not like unreasonable. They're like one woman is like, we have like, payroll, we have employees, like we have jobs, we want to go back to work. And without like a tangible demonstration of the threat of the virus, that this is probably going to continue, I would say, like this kind of tension between the national and state level like administrations, like increasing the level of shutdown and people wanting even less of it. And like, I don't know how that's going to resolve. I really have no idea. It's probably going to cause more things like this though.
And polls show that people want the shut down to continue. I mean, most people fear, but the people who want it to open, it's not a policy decision that they can just like put to a side and just say, oh, well, like I don't really have to think about this. This does impact your daily life, whether you can leave your house or not, or whether you can go to your job, or whether you're going to have enough money to pay the bills. This is like a, you know, a very existential question of whether to open up your state, you know, open up businesses and whatnot. And so this affects everybody, and everyone has like an incredibly strong opinion about it. And if you really want your state to open up, you're very angry about this issue. You're actually going to go out to the streets and like bang on the Capitol. I mean, they were doing that in the state Capitol. There's like a picture of them with all their face. It's like all these middle-aged, you know, conservatives with their faces planted to the glass, being like, "Open up! We want to work!" You know. It's like the wages are like, we want to go back to our cages. Let us back in. We want our office shops. I mean, it is funny, but you really we shouldn't mock it too much, because people are hurting right now. I mean, there's millions of people out of work due to the, you know, shutdown orders, and people are, you know, frightened of where their how they're going to pay their bills, and they want to have these services. You know, people want to go out. I don't know if we're going to have a revolution over whether, you know, Applebee's will stay open or not. I'm not quite sure, but some of these boomers are very angry about it. And this is what motivates a lot of the Trump base. I mean, all these people were carrying Trump flags. Some of them were even carrying Confederate flags in Michigan, which both confused and frightened a lot of people. But I mean, you know, rural areas, no matter where they are in America, love the Confederate flag. I mean, it could be like in upstate New York or wherever people will just like fly it. It's like a sign of, you know, defiance against government authority and everything like that. And people, rural areas all across America, really gravitate towards it, which a lot of people don't understand. But of course, liberals are very furious that they would be carrying Confederate flags at this protest. And you know, digression aside, these protests are going to increase. Like we're going to see other people do this in states across America. I could see something like this happening in Maryland or anywhere where and especially in Virginia. I mean, in Virginia, there's a stay-at-home order or shelter in place. I don't even really know the difference till like June 10th, which is, I think, the longest lasting order right now. You're going to definitely see these protests happen everywhere, and there's not a real solution. I mean, you know, people who support the shutdown, it's like, well, just stay at home and be happy, and you know, we'll open up a year from now. You know, people who are very pro shutdown are starting to agree more with Dr. Fauci, who's like, yeah, we should be shut down for 18 months. I'm like, I mean, we're not going to have like an economy or a country, like everyone will be out of work. Like, I don't know how like having like these stay-at-home orders for 18 months is even a viable solution. And everyone wants like something to open up by by next month. And you know, the politicians don't really have any way to reassure. It's just like kind of mockery, and it's like, well, you're going to die.
Part of it was that the average person like that the average person who isn't really paying attention they typical people didn't really understand the actual length of this shutdown. Like you can tell that like people that have been paying attention to this, like not just the people on Twitter that kind of got the early drop on it in like late January or whatever, but people who have been paying attention to this closely have already kind of realized that like people in the know, people who have like administrative responsibilities are they're projecting like a months long, seasons long even shutdown, and you can just tell that hasn't permeated the general population like whatsoever. Like there's probably tons of people out there who still they were just like, they earnestly believed Trump when he said everything would be open by Easter. And like so in other words, like, you know, you and I and like lots of other people that were listening to that, we just probably knew like, yeah, whatever, like, you know, we're just going to wait for them to walk that back because it's inevitable. There's probably, you know, tons of people out there, people that were actually at that protest even, who legitimately thought like, yeah, like by Easter, this will be blown over and it'll just be another past, you know, news cycle item. And meanwhile, people in the know were saying like, yeah, like a year and like a year and a half. Like that's like a real discrepancy. It's not between like a 2-week, 3-week thing. It's between people who thought it was going to be a month and a half and people who thought it was going to maybe be a year and a half, who think it's going to be a year and a half. And so when that starts to manifest, it's going to be bad.
Yeah, we talked about this previously where conservatives were already mad after less than a week of the shutdown. Like after a week, they're like, we're going to sacrifice our lives. Like Glenn Beck is like, it's fine. I'm willing to risk my life to go to TGI Fridays or to make sure that Target's open. And they had all this rhetoric going in the first week. And this is only going to increase. Like more people are going to share this. But at the same time, many millions of Americans are frightened that if they go outside, we lift up the orders to a certain degree, that everyone's going to die. So there is a major discrepancy between this. And I also think a reason why people are getting more mad is their areas, especially if you live in a rural area, you haven't really been hurt that much by the coronavirus. All you're seeing the economic damage, but you're not seeing the actual virus destroy your hometown. Like it's
that's huge.
Yeah, I mean, there's like if you live in New York City versus you living in rural Michigan, there's a totally different viewpoint of this virus. I mean, people in New York City are seeing, the ambulances going by. They see that they're hearing hospitals being overfloated. They know people who have died, everything like that. But like somebody who's living out in the Dakotas, they're not really suffering that much. And they don't understand why they have to, lose their job and have everything shut down and not being able to get have the lifestyle that they had, just a few weeks ago, that everything's changed. They don't understand why they have to abide by these orders for, another month or two. And so I don't really know particularly what the solution here is. I'm somewhat sympathetic to the protesters, despite their interesting optics, so to speak. I am somewhat sympathetic to their viewpoint. I mean, we can't keep the country shut down forever until we get a vaccine. I mean, that's just not going to work. And there's going to be millions of more people filing unemployment. And the people who are advocating for a shutdown forever don't really have a good solution to alleviate the suffering caused by such a lengthy shutdown. They'll just well, we'll put all the experts in charge and everything will be fine. Just trust us. Just trust us. Everything will be good. We'll get the World Health Organization on this. We'll keep it down. So I don't know.
What was interesting about watching the protest against the Michigan governor, talking about just optics, it just made me kind of laugh a little bit because, like I feel like whoever the master of the future is the person who is able to bottle the power of cringe. Like when you pay attention to extreme political discourse in America, like online, you have like people on the right who think that like we're going to have a bunch of people in tactical gear who decide to finally, take a stand against like white genocide. And then you have people on the left who think you're going to show up in like black with Molotov cocktails ready to protest in the name of like racial justice. But like they're both
and all of them, and they're all transgender too. All the people.
Yeah, they're all transgender. But in reality, like the real world historical man who is coming, he's gonna have an army of obese Midwesterners with American flag tracksuits behind.
Yeah, he's gonna rile up the suburbs and the rural areas.
Yeah,
and then like all the people who are saying, we were talking about this, before we started the podcast, is that all the people who are imagining this like revolution, there's like all these accelerationists who are like now talking about like, this is the moment to seize, like we're on the verge of taking over. And like, there's just going to be this magical army of, black shirt fascists from 1920s Italy that's going to magically appear in America, even though there's no organizations or groups are really based for this. They're just going to magically appear next week to take over a state capitol. And a lot of these people are the most negative towards these protesters, but the only people who might like actually try to take over the state capitol are the people with the signs with the like poorly photoshopped image of Governor Whitmer like looking like Adolf Hitler. And it's like these people are like, oh, this is cringe. I don't like this. But these are the people who are actually upset enough to actually take to the street and demand action.
Yeah, this is your army, man. Like if like everyone on the internet everyone's an Amerifat, you're a burger. It's like if you can't confidently embody like the European stereotype of what an American is, you're not gonna make it. Like you have to find a way. You can't be, like shredded and 6'5". You have to be like like this is like middle-aged kind of typical guy who that's who's gonna show up to demand, and you're not demanding like radical political change. Like you're demanding that like the chain stores just open their doors again. Like that's what's gonna move history.
Yeah, and people have always like demanded like we need to do more DC and like these protests about this. And, like if you're gonna do those, like you're gonna mainly attract like QAnon supporters. It's like the rally. It's like we're gonna rally demand action against like Trump, or like doing like similar style street rallies that like liberals have staged ever since Trump got elected. If you're going to try to do that, you're just going to get QAnon people. And people have tried this. Like MAGA people have tried to do these, massive demonstrations in DC, and they only attract like a few 400 people who are like, release the mole children and like JFK Jr. is alive. Like these are their main issues. It's nothing relating to anything the dissident right cares about. So you're like people who think that like this is a revolutionary moment, I think are deluded. A lot of these upset boomers, like they're easy to laugh at, but they do have a point. We do need to have a solution to, help people out that is like actually going to help out open up our economy, but still like not leave like 1 million Americans dead. So that's the challenge that we have. And a lot of these liberal governors such as Whitmer don't really care about that. They're fine with keeping everything shut down. And her base of affluent white female liberals, or affluent liberals in general, aren't that hurt by this. I mean, they can all work at home. They don't have to physically go to their jobs, and everything's fine for them. I mean, they're just binge watching Netflix right now. But these people in rural America who actually have to go to their jobs and are worried about food production, their lives are upended. But on that point, we are finally going to talk about Karens, which we were talking about a little bit previously. Governor Whitmer herself is seen by many as a Karen. What is a Karen? Karen recently took off as a political insult after a viral tweet said the term is racist and sexist towards white women. Sometimes white women might be the most persecuted group in America. We'll get to that in a bit. Both the left and the right have now adopted it to describe their white female enemies. Some within the dissident right celebrate this development for popularizing the awful phenomenon. Awful, of course, means affluent, white, liberal female. Or actually, crap, I got it. I'm like the main person.
I know, this is your thing,
and I just like messed up. This is a huge error. Affluent, white, female, liberal. I should, it's time to end the podcast.
Oh, man.
I can't believe I messed up my own term. But anyway, this is actually wrong. The dissident right is wrong to say that this is popularizing awful, because Karen and awful are two different things. The media actually describes Karens as racist conservatives. As The Guardian puts it, Karen is commonly used in the U.S. to refer to a strident, middle-class white woman who talks down to people of color, usually in serving staff positions. A Karen would be a suburban soccer mom who wonders why there are so many hobos around her kids' schools. An awful is a childless female journo who writes a hit piece on said soccer mom. Karen has more in common with Becky, a popular black term used to mock white women, than with awful. It doesn't describe the powerful but only the slightly obnoxious middle-class white woman. Awfuls have far more power and they actually run the system. Karen is just a pain to deal with at the grocery store checkout line. Am I wrong here, Nightmare?
I mean, no, you're not wrong. I think that like in reality, there really is an overlap between Karen's behaviors and the awful's behaviors, but the awful's won't admit it. Like if you talk about like an affluent white woman who talks down to minorities, like I'm pretty sure that liberal white women are doing that all.
Oh, they absolutely do that. They're like the people who
you
have like their Mexican maid, and they're like, "Oh, can you clean this a little bit more? Can you please clean this?" As they got their Beto O'Rourke. And actually, they have like, "Hell yeah, I'm gonna take your guns" T-shirt on while they're telling them like their Mexican maid to like clean a little bit better. It's like, last time we had a little bit of a mess. Like you didn't do a very good job. There was some specks of dust on there, and they're just as liable to talk down to serving staff positions, regardless of race, as the Karens. But awfuls will use Karen to say that they're not a Karen. They will say like, yes. "Oh, I oppose this behavior," even though they engage in it themselves.
I think it was it Amber Heard? She was the celebrity, the actress, where she tweeted something about when Trump won, about how like she drove her like Hispanic nanny back to her like terrible neighborhood to drop her off at home so she wouldn't get like kidnapped by ICE.
There's so many stories like that. They're like, "Hey, you want to have immigration restriction, but who's gonna mow our lawns? Like, who's gonna take care of my kids?" Like, and all these awfuls were saying that. That's like awful behavior. But what they want to describe Karen, it's like a woman who was like very hot in her 20s, and she got like a husband. She raised kids. Like a Karen is always a mother. That's like another thing to describe. A lot of their behavior is like overly protective.
Yeah.
Now I'm not necessarily saying I'm defending Karen. Like I worked at a grocery store in high school. I dealt with a lot of Karens. Karens sucked to deal with as a grocery store cashier. And they would always like insist on like how you bag, and they would like pinpoint it. And then they demand you like take your groceries out to their car. They would just open up the trunk and they just like sit in their car so they wouldn't have to deal with you. And you're putting it in. I mean, it's like annoying, but at the end of the day, these people aren't ruining anybody's lives. They're not impacting the political system. They're not a political base that people actually defend. I mean, awfuls really do set the tone of the Democratic Party. I mean, we were talking about this previously with every candidate, trying to be more woke than the next. That was all trying to appeal to awfuls. Like awfuls like get into this, like, oh, they're saying trans rights. Oh, they're wanting to help our lovely illegal farm pickers, and everything like that. Awful is a much more powerful term. First off, it's funnier. Like Karen is just a normie meme that like, the lamest people in politics are celebrating. Like there's like people at National Review who are like 50, who are always behind the times on memes, who are like saying like, "Okay, Karen." It's the political. It's in the same league as "Okay, Boomer." When "Okay, Boomer" was popularized, the only people who said "Okay, Boomer" were Gen Xers who were trying to differentiate themselves from boomers. And it's the same way with Karen. Like Karens, it's being used by awfuls to differentiate themselves from Karens who they share many traits with but don't want to admit it.
Yes. And like, look, I think we have to say this at Highly Respected, both of us individually have been known to be fairly critical of women in politics. In different ways.
It's out of love. It's
out of love.
We criticize women because we respect
them.
But
let me just give like a kind of small defense of the Karen. That's a real thing, right? Like that's a real phenomena. It's like it's not. Yeah, you're right. It's not really funny. It's kind of a dated stereotype, but it is like clearly like a racist, sexist, classist stereotype, and it's like. The problem with it is that it's just not the only one. There's a lot of them, and there's a lot of ones that are better and funnier, but no one, you can't talk about them. So the thing that's obnoxious about the discussion around things like Karen and these stupid, like overwrought, like memes and things is that it's not the thing itself. It's being subjected to the journalistic think piece hypocrisy about how like, actually, in this case, using this like crude stereotype is actually like okay and good, and it calls us to reflect upon our white privilege and like systematic It's like you have to. It's like that's what liberalism is. It's like you have to listen to these people give a rationalization for why like their pet group is allowed to use like this like clearly crude stereotype of a type of person. Which again, it's accurate. The problem is. there's like a million more. Like if for every Karen, there's a different group, a different like either sex or ethnicity or something like that, where everyone could come up with like a quick way to describe their behavior that you would understand like immediately. But when it comes to Karen, everyone has to be subjected to it for the double reason that it's, we're talking about white women, and also white women are kind of, I mean, listen, it's just, they're kind of the vanguard.
You respect white women are highly respected.
Yes.
Clarification.
They are the vanguard of humiliating self-debasement in American culture and politics. And so if there's ever a group that is like more willing to make themselves the butt of humiliating jokes for the purposes of like trying to score like political points with people that they want to be in the good graces of, it oftentimes does turn out to be like women, white women and stuff like that. Like, and so they kind of, I don't know, it's a terrible they like a lot of them, that's the awful phenomenon. They volunteer themselves in like a moment of virtue signaling to be like the piñata for the groups whose approval makes them feel good about themselves,
And awfuls are the reason why we have the most ridiculous examples of the left right now. I mean, trans rights is popular because awfuls have embraced it. The open borders is popular because awfuls have embraced it. Like all these things that like they're the most easily brainwashed by media messaging. And then they put it in their community. They're like, oh, I want to take my kid to drag queen story hour. It's always affluent, white, female liberals. And this time I definitely got it right. I'm not messing up my own term or the term I helped popularize. And it's always awfuls. It's always white women who are doing this. This is why we have gay marriage. This is why we have the discussions about trans rights. This is why we have gender pronouns in everyone's Twitter bio. This is why we have the most extreme racial rhetoric coming from the left, and why reparations is now a serious issue. Elizabeth Warren, who is, queen of the awfuls, was like, I believe the first Democratic candidate to come out in favor of reparations. More than anything, it wasn't the non-white candidates. It wasn't Kamala Harris or Cory Booker. It was Elizabeth Warren. And they're at the vanguard of all these issues. Now, you could say that they don't necessarily come up with these ideas, but they come to champion them, and then they turn it into actual policy, into actually popular will. And this is a phenomenon that, I want to hope that Karens are a little bit different than the awfuls. I mean, it is good that they are like, chastising themselves for the behavior that they also engage in, even though they want to deny that. It's eventually Karen's eventually just going to become an anti-white meme. I think it's going to be like Becky. Like Karen is pretty Becky. Much, yeah. I mean, Karen is Becky in 20 years. And Becky was, I guess it's not as popular now, but it was clearly like an anti-white meme. I mean, when The Root did like the 5 types of Becky, I think it was 5 types, or maybe it was 6. It was like clearly engaged in like incredibly racist rhetoric, but everyone thought this was funny. I mean, it was like a funny list. I admit that there was like funny parts to it, but you can't do this to any other group. You can only do it to whites. And the way that they, had a whole anthropology of these types is like outrageous. You couldn't do this to any other group. You couldn't do like, these are the 5 types of Hispanic women you'll go on a date with or something like that. Or these are the 5 types of, black women you have to deal with at the grocery store. You can't, that would be racist and that would get you banned. Your site censored, everything like that. But you can do the 5 types of Beckys that describe pretty much every white woman there is. And it's telling its readers that white women suck and they're a problem and you should avoid them.
Yeah, and the Karen phenomena is like, it's affluent, liberal, white women and white men too. Like it's them trying to join in with other people and like hating on downwardly mobile like white people. Like you can clearly tell there's like a class element to the distinction between like the awful and the Karen. Even though some of their behaviors, like what they're really trying to articulate is a type of lower class public inconsiderateness. Like the haircut, the can I speak to the manager thing. Again,
And
that's
like
all,
the trend
all real.
last year where if like any white woman called the cops on blacks, like blacks would like videotape it and like, this Becky is calling the cops on us because we're like causing noise, or like we refuse to, we're breaking into their apartment building or whatever. And they would just say like, this is racist, and they'd film it. And that's like a part of the Karen phenomenon. The Karen is somebody who's going to wonder why there's like a suspicious person coming into their apartment when they should just like leave it alone and ignore it.
Yeah,
And I think like the popularity of Karen is going to make white women, in order to avoid that stereotype, engage in even dumber behavior. They'll like overlook like, you know, a hobo pooping on the street because like, well, it'll be Karen to report about this or get it mad. You know, it's like telling them to have even unhealthier behaviors, because at the root of Karen is that it's an exaggerated and overemphasized healthy behaviors. Ultimately, I mean, everyone wants good customer service. Everyone wants to live in a nice neighborhood. People don't want suspicious people come into their apartment buildings. You know, they're a little overzealous in, you know, wanting these behaviors enforced. And, you know, we should mock that. I mean, in a society, you should be able to mock it, but we should at the same time not be encouraging unhealthy behaviors in order to avoid becoming a Karen.
It's a fine line. We're walking the tightrope here, you know?
Yeah, that's very true. But in conclusion, Awfuls attacks the power system. Karen is the power system attacking those without power. And I think that's the best way to put it. Even though Karen is an actual type, it's fine to make some jokes about it. But it's worth keeping in mind when liberal journos are talking about, okay, Karen, it's the power structure talking, and Karens don't have the power. Awfuls are closer to the power. But, you know, now we're moving on to talking about another group we highly respect, we, you know, cherish, and it's our Black brothers getting Trump bucks this week. Donald Trump possibly achieved Blexit, which of course is Candace Owens' effort to encourage blacks to leave the liberal plantation. But Trump may have actually done this by directly depositing $1,200 into black bank accounts this week that he did with his stimulus package. This move thrilled Black Twitter, and there were several tweets about how Trump is now a cool white boy, which is, you know, a major achievement. Nightmare had a great tweet about this very effort and how years of failed conservative outreach never elicited this type of response. Here, I'll read the tweet. This is very good. Maybe I'll try to emulate Nightmare's voice. I'm kidding. I'm going to read it in my own voice. Black praise for Trump checks is him further embarrassing conservatives who told everyone for years the way to get their support, that's blacks, was to teach them about Milton Friedman. I mean, Milton Friedman is not a cool white boy to the people receiving their direct deposits. So, but Nightmare, explain this a bit, because there's been billions of dollars. It's not millions. There's been billions of dollars over the last 40 to 50 years for Republicans and conservatives to do outreach to blacks, and it has always failed. You know, Republicans only get 8% of the black vote nationally. There's clearly, you know, no matter what they do, blacks oppose what Republicans are for. But I mean, Black Twitter, this was like a real phenomenon. This wasn't just a few tweets. These were viral tweets going on about like, hell yeah, Trump just gave me money. My own dad never gave me money. And there's like, this is like, my dad left me, but Trump gave me $1,200. Trump's way better than my dad. Like, there was like several tweets saying this. And yeah, there's never been a Republican policy that has elicited such wide approval. And it was literally just giving them money.
That's all it took. That's all it ever took, really. I mean, the thing is that it's hard as the years go by, Scott. It gets harder for me to like articulate the approach without just describing it as like a racket. Because like, right, yeah, for decades you have like conservatives spending like, yeah, like you said, like I don't even know how much money on Republicans on like black outreach, and you stop and you realize this was never going to go anywhere. You guys knew it was never going to go anywhere. They knew it was never going to go anywhere. Like the people it was targeted to, everybody knew this was going to be a failure. And yet the money was spent. The elections were held, right? The outreach was performed. And so at a certain point, you're like, well, then why was this being done? But it is true that there is like a Republican demographic, conservative audience for this stuff for decades that liked to believe that they could somehow convince Black America to buy into the kind of libertarianism that white America, by the way, that's the irony, right? White America didn't even choose to buy into libertarianism. They were kind of forced into it through the unfolding of like the post-60s political history. And they
as a way of resisting the civil rights revolution. And
yeah,
I mean, LBJ's policies is that they had to turn to states' rights and like individual autonomy in order to resist the crushing weight of progressive policy coming from the national government. Yeah.
I mean, think about the irony of like it's like you feel like a crazy person. Like you can't even talk to a normal conservative about this. Like your whole ideology was bought so your grandfather could find a respectable way to oppose things that he couldn't oppose. And now you're telling me that the very demographic that your grandfather was opposing, you're going to try to convince them to buy into the same ideology that
and you're telling them that your grandfather was a racist Democrat, but you're not related to your grandfather, because it's all about like, well, the Democrats are racist. And it's saying that people who are opposing like integration, and probably with Trump running against Biden, they're going to talk about how racist Democrats oppose busing, when it's all these people, like some of the same people were opposing it then, or their fathers or grandfathers were opposing it at that time. And now it's like these Republicans imagining that they're totally different people from the ones who were opposing these policies in the 60s and 70s. And it's an identity cutoff. They imagined that there was like the Democrats of today were opposing it, when it's actually their own family members who switched to Republican Party due to Reagan, and Republicans pretending to oppose these policies.
Yeah,
and
like race issues have always been a third rail for conservative politics, and it's not. I'm not necessarily saying, of course, that the way out of this would be for Republicans to adopt like hard line, like racist attitudes. Of course not. But what I am saying is that their unwillingness, they were clearly and explicitly wasting their time by pursuing these pointless outlets, like trying to convince Black America of the virtues of like libertarianism, Milton Friedman, knowing these were all failures, because these approaches did not really violate like contemporary standards for like right and wrong on race that are determined by like journalists and like
they fit in the dogma of public discourse. It's like, this is not about race. This is about
exactly
the Constitution or states' rights. It fit into the allowable public discourse.
So
it gave them away, and that's how. And then these people now believe that what they were using as a tactical means is now their whole ideology, and it's convincing them to adopt a lot of stupid policies. And you alluded to this a bit, is that Black outreach was not so much about winning over Black voters. It was about comforting white Republican voters that they're not racist. Is that they brought out like a token Black conservatives to say like, oh yeah, the real racists are Democrats, and we're ready to leave the plantation. We're stuck on the plantation. We're just ready to jump over the fence and leave. It's a way to comfort white conservatives to not feel racist. And being labeled a racist is arguably the worst label you can get in our society. Like everyone wants to resist being called that. They're like, I'm not a racist. I'm not of that. They would rather, in some ways, they'd rather be considered a child murderer or anything like that. I think the best example of this was Jeffrey Dahmer, who was a rapist, cannibal, serial killer who did all types of horrible things to his victims, who were primarily Asian and Black. But he had to emphasize in court that he may have been a cannibal, but he was not a racist. And that shows that like in our society that it's better to be a cannibal than a racist. And that's why these white Republicans, when Democrats are calling them racist, instead of ignoring it and being like, oh, well, whatever, I don't care, I'm going to represent my interests, they have to cling to any Black conservatives they can find and like saying like, oh no, we're doing so much for Black communities. We love Blacks. They love us. They're just brainwashed by the Democrats. And, they don't realize that, Democrats are also going to say that that's racist, but that's less racist than the alternative.
Yeah, and if you pay attention to like, if you're paying attention to conservatism, and not just as it manifests now, but even a decade ago, like Candace Owens And then even older people, I don't know, do you know Larry Elder? Do you know Larry Elder?
Larry
Elder.
Larry Elder.
He hosts a radio show, and they are one of the interesting things that you have to notice is that like both of them, and then even a generation before that, you have older people like Thomas Sowell, Walter Williams, who used to host. Well, Walter Williams used to be a substitute for the Rush Limbaugh show when Rush was out. These guys are Elder, Sowell, and Williams are like hardcore libertarians, and they're black, and that's like kind of on purpose. So that gets back to the point, and it's the same thing with Candace Owens. Candace Owens is also somebody who takes like a very hardline libertarian approach. That's why these people were on like the Dave Rubin show back a few years ago. Like Larry Elder was on it, Candace Owens was on it, because Dave Rubin found that really amenable to his own view of like kind of libertarianism. And the point though is that it's not for Black America. It's for assuaging the consciences of their white audiences. Like so Larry Elder is like takes a hardcore libertarian approach on his like radio show that I used to listen to like years ago. He does that because he has a predominantly white Republican conservative audience, and they like to hear a black man get on the mic and talk about, you know, picking yourself up by your bootstraps and how taxation is theft. It makes them feel like they're accomplishing something. And the alternative to that, it's funny that Trump received praise just by giving like people money. It wasn't just black people. He gave a lot of people money, but it was Black Twitter had a really positive reaction to it. It's because, you know, the reality in America is that Black America is much poorer than the rest of America. So giving them money is like a tangible good that they can point to. My point here is that there are probably other meaningful ways that you can reach out to Black America that don't fit within the conservative like ideological pipeline of like failed libertarianism that would appeal to them. But you have you know what I mean? Like you have to do it without becoming just like a basic Democrat, but you also have to do it without, you know, by divorcing yourself from this kind of explicitly, intentionally impotent conservative approach. There probably are real things you can do. Giving them money,
there is. And I mean,
one thing.
The Trump bucks is clearly getting some support. I don't know how much it'll translate into votes, but it's providing a lot of good content. And one note I want to add before moving on is a lot of these Black conservatives are better than the white conservatives that they're promoting. I mean, there's like Jesse Lee Peterson, who's like really good on these issues. Thomas Sowell is a lot better than most conservatives on the important issues.
I agree.
Clarence Thomas is arguably the best Supreme Court justice on the issues. I mean, it's between him and Alito. And I'd probably say Clarence Thomas. So there is like a way that they become better than white conservatives in a way, but they are outliers among their community.
They have more room to be based.
That's true. We love our base Blacks, but you know, moving on, there are actually surprisingly some Blacks who are adopting Milton Friedman's positions. Believe it or not, it's MSNBC host Joy Reid. Joy Reid somehow has a Harvard degree and also claims her old anti-Israel and anti-gay writings were planted by hackers. She is a serious intellectual, though. Everyone knows this. But she was very upset that Black Twitter was excited about Trump bucks. She tweeted this in response. By the way, you all realize that check Treasury is sending you with Trump's name scribbled on it is your money, right? It's your tax dollars that Congress appropriated. Trump is basically the guy who lends you back your own lawnmower he borrowed and has had at his house for months. This was pure hackery, but it netted over 20,000 retweets. Like liberals thought this was a good point, but it's now saying like Social Security isn't really a benefit. That's your own money that you're getting. Like Medicaid, it's your own money. And you can make this argument about everything. It's like welfare, that's not your own money. That's your money coming back to you. That's the government bringing back your lawnmower you clearly had. That is funny. Joy Reid's tweet is really funny. It'll show you how liberals will use the dumbest conservative talking points if it's about hating Trump. Like there's been times where liberals have complained about the debt, which nobody cares about, and they certainly didn't care about at any time in the last 20 or 30 years. But because, Trump's bills aren't cutting the debt, they're going to use this argument. So, Joy Reid is clearly not a libertarian. She doesn't support any libertarian policies, but she's using one of the silliest arguments from Milton Friedman tier libertarians to argue against Trump bucks. Apparently the government should not be giving you your own money, and you shouldn't credit the government for giving you your own money. That's your money that you're getting. And that can be applied to all these government benefits. So what's your take on that, Nightmare?
I mean, Joy Reid, don't tread on me. Nancy Pelosi with the Gadsden flag.
No, the worst was all these conservatives who are like, welcome to our side, Joy. And there was all Joey Saladino. There's MAGA Twitter who was celebrating it. There was Reason writers who are like, you're exactly right, Joy. Glad to have you on our team. But I mean, Joy Reid is one of the biggest hacks in politics. I mean, she has no political ideology whatsoever. She's made a bunch of terrible comments about Bernie and the left, and she always shows that she has no knowledge base. I remember one time her saying that every one of Trump's wives came from the Soviet Union and are and it's wives have come from Slovenia and Slovakia, which were never in the Soviet Union, and Slovenia was in Yugoslavia, which was not allied with the Soviet Union. And she always makes these claims, but she continues to build herself up due to being the token minority host on MSNBC, and she can say whatever she wants. I mean, she did get away. I mean, she lied that her tweets were her old writings were planted by a hacker and the FBI was investigating it. And she put this out there and her network believed her. And then it clearly turned out that she wrote these things herself and there was no punishment to her at all. I think maybe she got a 1 week suspension or something like that. But it's and I think there was even cases of plagiarism and other things and her citing writers that if you're a white liberal, you can never cite, but they just ignored it. I mean, so there is a way that liberals will, cater to anything that non-whites do if they're benefiting them. I mean, they don't really have a good non-white host to replace her with, so they're just going to countenance all their dumb takes.
To be honest, I'm still reeling over I didn't know she had a Harvard degree. I feel like my perspective.
I think she said that she struggled there and she wasn't sure of how she got in.
I mean,
she had she was at the bottom of the entry of the admission class.
My opinion of these institutions, I'm always I keep thinking it's at its lowest point, and then I just get totally swept up. It
gets really surprising when you realize people have Harvard law degrees and stuff, and the dumb stuff they say on Twitter, and it's it's Ivy League law professors who are believing the liberal version of QAnon conspiracy theories about the Grand Marshal ready to execute Steve Bannon, and they're this is very true. It's bro, you're considered one of the greatest intellectuals in our society, and you're believing the worst Facebook conspiracy theories that are out there.
I mean, it does. Let me say just about this. I don't know how widely the sentiment was shared between other members of the press or whatever, but I guess a rosy way to look at this is that, it shows you how realignments aren't as far-fetched as people would like to think, and that politics does have this large aesthetic component that mostly determines what people say. So in other words, all Trump has to do is what he did, and he can have ostensibly dyed-in-the-wool MSNBC liberal journalist repeating Cato Institute tier talking points.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's what I almost want to say well, come on, man, what else can we do? You know what I mean? He could have people doing that to a larger degree where it kind of is happening to a small extent on the Democrat side where they're kind of taking the side of corporate interests more explicitly as the primary was going on, when they were being challenged by democratic socialists from the left. And so you start to feel there is a pathway to potentially pigeonhole all these people into admitting that they're really part of just one giant disgusting bipartisan thing. You know what I mean?
And they've adopted, neoconservative foreign policies due to Trump. I mean, they've embraced like Max Boot, Bill Kristol, all these people they hated.
Yeah, exactly.
Just because Trump, I guess because they're attacking Trump, they have adapted free trade absolutism because Trump wants to have trade protectionism. And this, like the same, like taking positions just because people you don't like take them is also applicable to the right. And you made a very good point about how aesthetics determines political positions. And so like a lot of us would agree that going back to the Whitmer protests is a lot of us would agree with the Whitmer protests, and they would definitely hate Governor Whitmer more than they hate the protesters. But due to the cringe aesthetics, people are like, oh, I don't want to be associated with this. This is bad optics. Like, this is like silly optics. They don't want to be associated with it. And the same as, the same as with the left. If Trump is supporting something, they have to oppose it no matter what. And so Trump not going, not starting another war is bad. Trump like trying to defend American workers is bad. Trump now giving free money to the Black community is bad because that's your money. This is taxation is theft. So we'll hopefully see, we're going to see a lot more of this realignment as as Biden faces off against Trump. I think Biden is definitely going to take more of these previously thought of stereotypical conservative positions, especially on foreign policy, trade, and other issues against Trump, who, yes, he's been a disappointment in office and challenging the conservative consensus, and he's not been as much of a national populist as we like, but he's still much better than the GOP orthodoxy, and he's still pushing things in a national populist direction.
And the virus could help accelerate this.
Yes, that's true. That's true. I mean, there could be a chance that Trump champions an immigration moratorium. I mean, maybe not by who suggested it. I mean, Jeff Sessions just suggested it today, which may convince Trump to not support it because he hates Jeff Sessions so much. But maybe somebody who is more allied to Trump or Trump likes more decides to champion it, and it could create a new realignment that Trump is defending American workers while Democrats are screwing them over by wanting more cheap labor. But on that note, I think Highly Respected has gone on far too long today, so we're going to have to end it here. Nightmare will, of course, have to have you back on. And if you want to follow Nightmare Vision, he's at God Close My Eyes on Twitter, and that's all one word. Nightmare, thank you for coming on.
It was great to be here. I'd love to be back.
And until next time, stay respected.